This is going to be recorded and broadcasted on YouTube, so I like your faces maybe to stay live if you want them, or just show your name, and we'll use these aliases to refer to each other. This is part one of what will be three-part series on M people, and I took liberty to decide what this format is going to look like because I think I'm the most credible person here to be objective about what questions are going to be asked. And here's why. So I joined NVivo a long time ago, one of the first few users, but I was not a founder. I do know the founder. So as far as I can tell, Aris and Argonauta, who are here with us, are members and also founders and actual people that actually did the work. So I will take the liberty to ask them questions about what People is, what it wanted to be, what it was, and a little bit of how it worked. So before we start and move forward, I'd like each of you to say something about what your interests are, and you don't have to tell the truth even, but just tell us just a bit about who you are, what you think people should know about you. So let's go with Aris first.
Sure. Yeah, I guess the most pertinent detail that I can give is that empeopled at the time 10 years ago, 10 or 11 years ago that I started it, I saw it very much as sort of my life's work. Unfortunately for me, it had to be put on pause just 3 years after that. But the inspiration for it sort of comes from my background, which is in finance, and started having a front row seat in 2008 to the financial crisis, and which I think was very impactful for people of my generation, and also seeing sort of the thin veneer of control and the very deep problems of governance during that time, and being very impacted by that, and trying to think of solutions for how we can change things in a system that seems almost impossible to change. And it was at that point that those interests and that situation sort of inspired the idea. I can keep going if you want, or we can stop there and I can continue later.
I think that's pretty good. So let's go to Luis.
Yeah, so I'm Luis. I'm a coder and developer, mostly for front end. And yeah, I guess that people should know that I'm interested in things. Things interest me, like all kinds of things. Music, drawing, art, code, and in the aspect of empeopled, hearing Ari talk about his plans really were so interesting to me, the social aspect and what he wanted to build, that I don't know, I got very passionate about that, even though I'm usually more chaotic and anarchist. Yeah.
Cool. We like anarchism. I do. So we have one distinguished guest who is actually honoring us with his presence, but also is helping out with his it's his first active move towards the people. This is Tomas. Tomas, say a little bit about yourself.
Oh boy, I did not know we were going to do this. Hi everyone, my name is Tomas Gutierrez. I've known Yanni since a few years after coming to the US, or going to the US, because I've relocated. Luis, I like your saying of I like things. I like systems. I'm a systems thinker and an optimizer. And I'm an engineer and I'm an entrepreneur. And I'm always thinking about how we can improve everything. And Aris, I really liked our short exchange into the vision that you have for people. And I loved, as we were walking through the lakes of Minnesota with Yanni, the vision that he also showed me. So I'm excited to learn more and hopefully support.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you for coming.
And last one, this is me. Is No Good is the name you're going to remember, and everything is not. So is no good, is no car, is no phone. And I am a technologist and academic. I have a terminal degree in engineering. So many things interest me that it's not even funny what kind of ADD one can develop by just liking the world and life. And I'm a pessimist and optimist at the same time, in good, healthy doses, which is why sometimes I'm cynical and sometimes an extreme optimist about everything. And part of what brings me to Empeopled is actually the founders and the people that I met, and also the vision that we all share. I also have somewhat of a front row seat because of age and all the other things that the financial crisis of 2008, which shaped the world. I had an early entry to Bitcoin, and I was running a node since 2013, which is a long time ago now. And given all that, I embraced with a world of distributed systems, reading books about it, learning everything about the blockchains that exist, and so on. And so when I saw that and people said, "Oh yeah, we're going to build this on the blockchain," I thought, okay, something big is happening because this person who is the founder sees things that sometimes I can't see. So with that, I'd like to say, and people, it's not just a website, but it was a website. It still is, and it will be more things given the vision that I've seen come from the founder. So what I'd like to ask first is maybe go with Aris and say, what is it exactly? Just maybe repeat what you said, but expand a bit. What is it exactly that made you start Empeopled, and what was your vision? What did you want it to see become?
Yeah, again, the catalyst, if there was one, was probably the financial crisis. But the goal behind it was to help create a process, a system, a mechanism by which people could organize to affect change in the real world, and to experiment specifically with different governance structures, discover different and new leadership to run those different governance structures. And obviously in the real world, that's not sort of feasible due to the constraints around having your own city, country, whatever kind of system that would allow you that kind of freedom. But on the internet, of course, those restrictions go away. The trade-off, of course, is there's less physical interaction and ability to enforce quote unquote laws, but it opens up the idea for parallel experimentation and governance. And that was the concept, and that was sort of the contribution and people tried to make, was merging social media with self-governance. So anybody could start a quote unquote country, which was really just a topic like a Reddit, like subreddit kind of idea. They could elect their own moderators, and those moderators would lose power after a certain period of time. They could vote on the rules that affected their communities. They could vote actually on the content to create a filtration system like a Reddit. And later, a year after we started it in 2012, so in 2013, we implemented a communal Bitcoin treasury system where we lent Bitcoin for interest that would feed back into the communal treasury. So that was basically a DAO about 4 years before I think anybody used the term, very, very early. It wasn't decentralized, of course, because this was all centralized infrastructure, but to be fair, even the DAOs today are at least in part on centralized infrastructure. And that technology simply didn't exist at the time. But yeah, that was the goal, to really bring governance mechanisms and experimentation to help address governance and innovation in governance shortcomings in the real world using social media / the internet.
So when I encountered the first DAOs at the time, I realized that I wasn't thinking of Empeopled, but very quickly when we went back to thinking about Empeopled, I realized, holy crap, Empeopled was the first DAO. It just didn't have a cryptocurrency to run underneath it as a base layer of interactions and transactions and voting and all that. So I pointed this out to Aris, and it seems like he was effectively ahead of its time in that sense, but also lacked the tools that we have today to make it really work, which is why you have a lot of DAOs. So shifting a little bit gear here, let's talk to Argonauta and say, okay, Luis, you met Aris a long time ago. Tell us maybe the circumstances of how you got involved with Empeopled and what exactly you thought Empeopled was or was trying to be from your point of view.
Well, I was part of another company that got hired by Ari, and our job initially was just design for the interface and like define more of the concepts or translate his concepts to a visual, I guess a visual design. But it, so initially was that just that, but the more we talked, because we needed to talk so that we could understand what he wanted as a UI or as a website. And then little by little, we saw, me and the other guy I work with, we saw that we could help a little bit more, so we started also working on the UI mainly. So so that's how I really started within People. Basically, I was a paid developer, but yeah, then we continued for a few years with Ari. And I, even though we started with the UI, I then later also was doing more work in the backend as well. Even though I kept telling him that I wasn't feeling too sure about coding in Python, and this was 10 years ago. And also, one aspect that interested me about the People was that it was a really complex app at the time, when we didn't have all the tools that we have now to build websites. Like, we didn't have React or Vue or these concepts about building a ton of apps with just JavaScript. So a lot of the things that we did for that, we had to do from scratch. We did use a JavaScript framework called Backbone, which by now it's probably forgotten. But yeah, that was one of the things that I liked, that it was just technically difficult. It had a ton of issues or problems that we had to find solutions for, because it had everything. Like, the ideas were really big, and translating that to a website was, a challenge.
Yeah, that brings up a point, if you don't mind me interjecting as well, Isna, but yeah, the distillation of this ambition, the way that even I've spelled it out on the call today, of, okay, we want to have parallel experimentation for governance structures on the internet. I mean, such a general and huge statement. The distillation of that to an actual user experience that's consumable and understandable is sort of a major challenge, and something I think, just to tease as to future conversations for the next part in this series, a huge part of where I think we took the next step for simplifying and really getting to the foundational aspects of what we're trying to accomplish now through blockchain tech and through the smart contracts that we've created together.
Cool. I like where this is heading, and I'd like to actually ask Tomas, who actually is the kind of person that builds these kind of systems. Listening to what these guys are discussing, and like a user experience, thinking about governance, and sorry to put you in the spot here, but you're our guest now, and a valuable one. So what do you think? What do you think? Like, thinking about that, go back to put yourself back 10 years ago and say, well, these guys are talking about all this governance and user experience and Reddit-like things. What exactly? What do you think it was like? What would you have expected if somebody suggested this as a venture, or some social medium or website to join group?
First off, Luis, I remember Backbone. I remember jQuery. I remember Backbone. I remember all of the things, and completely agree. The things that we can do nowadays, it's crazy. We're not fully there yet, but it's amazing. So, love the discussion. I've been around these types of systems. I've been building products for 20 years. From engineering, started with C++, PHP, JavaScript. Nowadays, I'm fairly removed. But I even did a project. I led a project where we used, do you guys remember Counterparty? So we did a gold-backed bond for a company that would store physical gold, and then they would emit tokens that represented the gold. And we did that on Bitcoin on top of, or Counterparty on top of Bitcoin. And then giving a little bit more color to my thinking, I've always been frustrated with the status quo and always thought that things could be improved. And so when ideas like, remember the DAO? So the DAO on Ethereum and the whole concept of the white paper, when I read it, it got me excited, because I saw Bitcoin was exciting. I love the idea. That's more like gold, storage of value, and a lot of things that we can do on top of that. But Ethereum, this idea of a decentralized programmatic language, plus data store, plus tokens, was really excited. And when the DAO came along as one of the first encode DAOs, and now I know Aris and people that you were also thinking about that, which is so cool. I jumped on. I put some money in there, and with a grain of salt, right? I think we all need to have a healthy level of skepticism. But more than anything, I thought, holy crap, look, humans are decentralized and we can now do this thing in the DAO. And then it got hacked, and then we learned a lot of lessons, and then Ethereum got forked, and we can probably spend many hours thinking and debriefing on all that. And I had to download the whole blockchain and recover my money, and then I forgot about it, which, by the way, was my biggest and best return on investment because I forgot about it for many years. But that's a side conversation. And then I got onto Open Democracy. And remember the project from Luis, you might remember more than others, but Democracy OS, Santi, the Argentinian. And so I got excited for that, and I got excited about a bunch of other democracy type tools and projects. And then even with my good friend and co-founder right now, Alexander Torrenegra, we created a thing called Neocratia in San Francisco, where we wanted to take over local positions in government and put people that would vote on it behind it. And the idea was to do liquid voting, was to do all of these fun things. And I think like the conversation here, we might have been, right? Like, imagine if we could do that, like just Manchurian Candidate, like just put this figurehead, but behind we would do that. And ours, I also love the idea of these primitives that you're putting in place, that the way that we're thinking about this as primitives, about foundational technology and concepts on top of which we can build. And I also had an idea to do GitHub for legislation, where if we can have Neocratia, we can do people that would open source review things and do pull requests and do all those things. And the people that would care, we could also give them liquid voting. And that so I've thought through. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It's just that you got the wheels spinning here and I can't help myself. But while that might be, I don't know how realistic that is or isn't for real world governance because I don't know enough. It strikes me, given how slow they move, to be unrealistic at present, although a good long-term goal. But immediately it slots in to the type of governance that we want to encourage as a mechanism on empeopled for any community that needs to basically do anything somewhat sophisticated when it comes to their rules and governance.
Yes.
Let me give you a little bit of a pause here before we go too far, because I see the excitement, and I'd like to say that look at how the universe works, right? Tomás Gutiérrez Meos, he makes companies, he's a builder, and he's thinking about this at the same time, but he doesn't know you. You're doing kind of the same thing, maybe a little earlier, and you're all thinking about the same thing, getting excited about it. So very cosmically, everybody's here today, and maybe it's just us now, but maybe there are others like us. So before we divert too much on what you guys were talking about, liquid voting, other mechanisms, and go too far into the weeds, which is left for part 3, in my opinion. Let's go back and focus this a little bit on what was empeopled. So put your thoughts on pause for a second until we meet again. But for now, do me the favor and discuss a little bit about what empeopled was. So I will ask a question. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to answer your question because I have a problem and I go too deep, I get excited and then I don't answer the question.
Great
problem. Please slap me when I do that. But to answer your question, what do I think about this is that I've seen project try and not fail because we've learned from them, right? And I don't know what the right solution is. And that's why I'm here, because I'm excited to continue this conversation. And how do I feel about this? Excited, while also being hesitant in that there's a lot of small pieces from the marketing, the product, how do we activate the right people, the right community, and get things rolling. And so that's my thought as a builder of things at all levels. So for all of us to think about like what is the right minimum valuable product that can be gotten to, that can get people excited, and we can start doing things. And ours, to your point, have this parallel path of experimentation that works for countries, polities, cooperatives, businesses, wherever humans want to organize. You give this mechanism of value, of governance, etc. And so I'm excited. So that's my
Absolutely.
last thing.
Absolutely. And if you don't have a little bit of self-doubt, you're foolishly naive. Absolutely.
And Yanni
Yeah.
will yell at you.
You can tell you've thought a lot about this stuff, Tomas, because you're hitting on a lot of I don't want to call them pain points, but key aspects of what we think about, including, I think the hardest part, which is how do you get the right people, since it's such a unique early idea, to be excited. And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge.
Okay.
But going to Isno's question about sort of what empeopled was more specifically versus just what its goals were. Imagine sort of a platform where you could found sort of like Reddit, where you could found your own subreddit, and within that subreddit you'd have your own rules, but the difference being, and own moderators, the difference being though that through a voting mechanism you were able to dynamically adjust what those rules were, and you were able to dynamically select your moderators based on their ability to represent the community's needs. As we all know, sometimes those are major pain points in subreddits or any community. And the idea was to use this as sort of the beach landing for governance, because early on, as I was describing these ambitions and trying to distill it into something workable, the natural question that I didn't have a great answer for is, well, to govern what? Because governance is not something people really want to do. But in my mind, the answer to that was, we don't have governance because we want it. We have governance because we need it. And so a natural online practical application of governance where there was already a pain point to address was a combination of the quality of conversation on things like Reddit and the governance of that conversation, which are not exactly the same thing, but obviously related ideas. So through the filtration mechanism of voting, which we had a weighted voting system based on previous contributions instead of just a linear one-to-one voting system, we thought we could help distill higher quality conversation through that governance mechanism. And then we could also, by allowing for the dynamic rules and leadership, allow for a more relevant and dynamic and helpful ongoing conversation around that higher quality filtered content. So not just about filtering better content, but about maintaining it through moderation and the rules of posting and commenting in a dynamic way that was specific to each community. And the hope was that that is something that's understandable and tangible, and you don't really even need to care about governance necessarily to benefit from the side effects of good governance there. And once that would expand in popularity, we would abstract it into other functionality, which we started introducing just to prove a concept with, like, for example, the Bitcoin treasury, but really could be anything. And that's sort of how far we got. Was way ahead of its time, but also, frankly, even if it hadn't been, I think, in fairness, I had bit off more than I could chew, as one reviewer said, and that was true. But man, it was very exciting, and even now talking about it excites me a lot.
It's very interesting that you put the effort in thinking about this weighted voting instead of the linear voting. And an argument can be made about our democracies being running as linear voting, even though that's not strictly speaking true for the European Union or the United States, because of the federal republic that has effectively 2 senators per state, but no real representation when it comes to their weight on a vote as a higher house, and whereas the lower house has, the Congress has a linear weighting based on people, their representatives, which is interesting. So that to me says that governance is actually a little more complicated than meets the eye. And so when somebody says democracy or republic or federalism, or even a dictatorship to some level, oligarchy, all of those things are quite ambiguous, and they are add salt to taste, in my opinion. But without expressing what I think, I'd like to move a little more forward on this conversation and say, Aris, you remember what this was like at the fundamental level. Let me ask Argonauta and say, what do you remember about how this interface what the interface looked like, and how it functioned, and also how it was built?
Well, so I think that Reddit was a big inspiration of what we wanted to achieve, because you have to remember that this was over 10 years ago. So Reddit was actually a very good example of what a community could be. It had its own problems, and actually one of the reasons why we got a bunch of users into People was because they had a problems. I think it was something about the CEO, maybe. But, Reddit has a revolution every once in a while. So anyway, a lot of the concepts that are now taken for granted in social media were still kind of new. Like we were still in the Web 2.0 revolution, where people were starting to see that they could create tons and tons of content and manage that content. So that's something that we saw that was lacking. Like you could create your own community on Facebook, but you didn't have the power on how to control that community. So it was maybe Facebook and Reddit were the biggest examples of social networks for people to create communities, but we saw that basically you were told how to manage that community and you didn't have the power to decide how you wanted to build that community. And also it was very limited to just basically sharing news or sharing posts. So yeah, that was one of the things that we wanted to do on People, which was maybe we had to do that social news aspect because that would be the thing that would entice other people or would be familiar for other users. But we also wanted to go way beyond that, and it was kind of like thinking about that now. It was a crazy interface because you had tons of options where you could create a like the government structure, and we wanted to implement the chat so that people could talk in real time, which again probably right now it's very common, but back then was like on a website a
Yeah,
chat at all times.
it
It's kind of
actually looks a
crazy.
lot like Discord on dark mode.
That's right.
It looked the first version looked a lot like Discord on dark mode.
Yeah, and even the interface, the design was kind of interesting, you could say, because um we were in the times of everything had to look like a real life design, like if you had to have like letter textures or real or buttons that looked like actual buttons. But Ari just loved the mock-up design, the simplicity of just simple lines dividing a section, and that was all, or a lot of gray. Like that was also part of the thing that was interesting about the interface was minimalism, actually. Even though, and this is kind of an oxymoron, the ideas that we wanted to build were so complex, but we wanted to build an interface that was as simple as possible. So again, it was a challenge, and it was a lesson, because a lot of things that we wanted to do, we probably were over engineering at the time.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
that's 100%. That's so
That's
true. It's triggering to hear all this now, of course.
I
But
was going to say that thinking about that and getting that perspective, looking back, I mean, everybody's older here now, and think about the fact that you have experienced so much more when it comes to UI, UX. Looking back at what that was, you would say, well, maybe it was a little archaic, but maybe it was the stoicism. It was stoic and minimal by design, which you can see the vibe here. Ice has been all about the simplicity and the beauty and simplicity, that kind of thing. Knowing him well, I think it makes sense. But for anyone who has been around the internet and gets fascinated by flashing lights and cool websites, it's just hiding all this complexity and beauty that goes with what was trying to be built behind something that's just really opaque. But speaking of something that's opaque, let me get back to Argonaut and say, for those who are technically inclined and want to know things, especially Tomas, I know he built things, he recognizes the frameworks you use. Tell us, just like in a nutshell, how was it built? A website with database, with something in the back end, front end. What did it look like in a nutshell?
Okay, I know more about the front end because that was my specialty. I was working a little bit on the back end, so I don't remember a lot of all of the structure of the back end. But we were working on Python, which was an interesting choice as well because it was new. At least a way to build websites with Python was kind of new compared to the more the better option back then, or the more old school option back then would be to build the backend in Java. But we knew that Java was like it was the old empire. It was going to crumble eventually on the web. So Python was a very good alternative, and I think that that was one of the things that we really chose well because it was easier to develop with. It was faster, and we had what by now would be a more common structure, but back then was kind of complex because you didn't have the ability to just click a couple of buttons and you had a server. We were working with the Amazon servers with AWS. For what I remember, we had like three different versions of empeopled. We had the staging version, we had the development version, and the live version. But we were working, there was a ton of manual work, not like now where you can just, go through Git to build the website. We had to basically upload the files, see that it worked manually, and then go and upload the files to the other servers and test again. And because of that, we were breaking the site often because we would miss a comma or something like that. We had a very normal database. It was MySQL. I think that we had Redis for stuff like data, like voting. That this is for data that has to be written more constantly, like votes actually. And we had a load balancer because we knew that one of the problems that websites had back then, like forums or other small websites, was that when they started getting popular, they would just again crumble because there were so many people that the servers would fail. And that was probably the most difficult part to understand because still now it's kind of complex to have the idea that you can vote. You click on a button and you vote for some news or some vote or some election, and that vote might go to one server or another server or another server. So you're sending data to different servers, but then you have to gather all of that data into one place so that you can know the total amount of votes. So that is still something that it's easier to handle today, but back then was like that was probably the most complex part. And going back to the front end, I guess it was also I wouldn't say groundbreaking, but it was showing like what is now a more common way to build websites, which is having all the UI or the JavaScript side or the UI side control most of the interface, while the backend provides most of the data. So you build all your interface right there on the browser, and we had the tools that were that started to become what we nowadays have, which is React and Vue. Back then was jQuery and Backbone, which was a completely different way to build websites via mostly JavaScript. But again, we didn't have the tools like now that you can even buy a whole social network. So we had to code so much for every little thing. Like we need a scrolling thing, like comments, for example. I remember that the comment tree, like you have on Reddit, where you can comment to every comment, so you can go 20 devils deep. We spent probably 6 months working on that, for example, and then refining and refining and refining.
Let me interrupt you for a second. Because I was actually going to put our technologist here, the guest technologist, on the spot, and he raised his hand. He has a question. Before he asks his question, I want to hear with one sentence, based on what you're hearing here, Tomas, and put yourself back in 2012, 2013. How does this sound to you? One sentence, and then ask a question.
Congratulations.
That's great.
That's my first word. Yeah. It sounds like a sensible stack. I agree. There's a lot of things that you could do back then, probably using Flask on Python. The MVC framework, the MVC architecture is the right one, and we're still seeing these days. So yeah, you were making a lot of really good choices. What I've learned is that what's important right now is time to value, and to not become dogmatic about the technologies that we use. It's the best technology that we can afford and that gives us the right metrics for success. And so it's really cool. What this tells me is, yeah, we've been thinking about this, made some good choices. Even today, like if we were to say, oh my God, let's do it on Ethereum and on blockchain, we still don't have sharding, so that we can get 100,000 transactions per second. Hopefully we get there at a really, really, and so even there's going to be some huge challenges of doing it on blockchain. But I think the choices back then were great. And I think the choices now, I think that the choices are much less important than how do we get to value? How do we get the train moving? How do we get momentum at the product community level? That's been a really hard lesson for me to learn as somebody that has good amount of OCD, perfectionism, thinks about products in terms of Aris. I love what you were saying, and at least what you were talking about, skeuomorphism, going against skeuomorphism, making things look like them, minimalistic. And what I think about, I think that the conversation to be having, first off, congratulations, and Luis, thank you so much for sharing that. That's really cool to see. Whatever technologies are chosen now, or whatever is done, I think one of the biggest challenges is, yeah, getting to good enough technology. Also, whatever you build, you're probably going to have to rewrite it every couple of years because projects change, even if you define them as well as possible at the beginning.
Cool.
And even the technologies like, yeah, but like Slack was built on PHP. Like we have a bunch of examples. I think what I was going to say, my core there is, what have we seen with crypto, with NFTs, with SBF, with AI, all of these things? It's marketing. It's getting people using it. It's time to value. It's how do we build good products, but also with good marketing. And I hate that word because I've never liked marketing, and I've needed to start learning what marketing actually means. Because an amazing product with zero marketing, zero users is a dead product. An okay product, mediocre product with great marketing is a successful company or product or whatever. And a brilliant product with great marketing can do whatever they want. It's an Apple. It's a few other examples that we have. Hate them or love them is no, because I know that we get into philosophy.
Yeah,
but I think
that's
the part on technology.
Yeah, it's very exciting to talk about these things, but I'd like to keep this brief because remember, other people are going to watch this, and if they zone out because they hear too many technical details, I think it's not going to be beneficial to them. So we will reserve a lot of that discussion for the future when we go to part 3, and we'll talk about how things are going to be built. But now let me just say, any comments on this by Aris? Like I know I want to get back to Argonauta and wrap up what the technical side is. But Ari, do you have any comments on what you're hearing? Just to wrap this.
Yeah, no, it's just a lot of nostalgia and just, wow, if I knew then what I know now, kind of tropes. But
yeah, put that on my tombstone, Ari, and I will put on Tomas's tombstone, frustrated with the status quo. So yeah, I'll go back to Argonauta. And so wrap up what you were talking about with the UI and all the complexity that went with all the choices, the frameworks, the kinds of things that have to work together, the asynchronicity, sharding, lack thereof, all of these things. So what exactly, how would you end it and say, okay, yeah, we built this, it had all these components. Now, did it work? Did it not work? Did it serve its purpose? Did it scale?
So I think that it worked as a lesson of how we could build something better, but I think that we were too early, and I think that we were so early that if you see, a lot of this discussion hasn't been about crypto at all, and that's one of the things that I completely ignored back then because I just didn't understand. So I just let Ari handle all the things about Bitcoin, which was the base for the crypto coins back then for the website. But it is still kind of the case now. Like, even though we want to build something in crypto, the platform is not as important as the people. And that's also something that we figured out back then, that, as Tomas said, you can build a good product, but people have to use it. and most likely people are going to use it in a different way from what you expected. So that was a very good lesson back then, that we were building something, and at the same time users were asking for some other things, not a completely different website, but they wanted different tools than what we thought were important for us. So yeah, that was the thing that I learned the most, was to, I guess, listen more to what users want if you want to build a community, or build the tools so that they can build whatever they want.
Let's get a question from Tomas. You had a waving hand. I don't know if that says hi.
Oh, no, I was clapping at what Luis was saying. Like we need users and we need fast iteration and evolution. And I
Cool.
think that's the way that we need to do. But I guess but Yanni, I think go ahead, please, because I think the technology is so cool and I love it. But I think the big question that I have is, what is different from this one that will maximize or hopefully give it the best chance of survival and becoming the thing that we use as humanity?
So let's get a comment here from Aris or Argonauta, and then we'll move on to my next topic.
Yeah, so I think the key difference here is, I think I made a lot of compromises and just didn't really understand through experience the progress of how something complex like this can evolve. And I think I ended up with a worse of both worlds solution to simplicity, which is to say that it's complicated and ambitious, but it tried to cater to people who didn't want to get their hands dirty with those things. And while I think ultimately that is a key transition when you want to go into the middle of the curve, as it were, of adoption, early on, we would have been better served by catering to a more hardcore and specific early adopter. And in this case, what we're doing now with crypto, I think a couple things going for it. Number one, it is for a specific person, which is a double-edged sword. It makes it easier to explain and find and market and describe that person in a way that's helpfully specific, but it also means that there's fewer of them. But the other advantage, if you want to see it that way, as to what we're doing now, is it's stripped down to an even more, where we may have been minimalist then in some senses, like the interface. It was not minimalist in terms of functionality. What we've done already here is, to me, as minimalist gets, meaning we've gotten to the core of what we're trying to do. And without going too far into the future discussions, what that is we're just trying to empower communities with decentralized self-governance.
Cool. Let me ask this.
That's it.
Yeah, let me ask this. I like exactly what you just said now, because what I was going to ask next is, looking back, Ari, what was your impression about the reception? What did the community actually do? How did it spread its message? Did it meet its purpose? What was the reception by the people, the users?
Yeah, it was funny actually. This was the era where selfies were becoming a thing in scale. And we would have some people who shall remain nameless, certainly nobody on this call, obviously, who their first instinct was to come into a community and post a selfie, for example. And then again, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier. We tried to cast too wide a net early on something that shouldn't have been a wide net. It wasn't a wide net product yet. But I will say others, especially the Redditors that came over, I think very much enjoyed the platform despite its shortcomings and liked the ideas. But by the time we had iterated them to a point where I think it was streamlined and helpful as a product, we kind of we couldn't get funding. Nobody understood these ideas yet. Nobody cared about them. They weren't popular. They weren't trending. And that's kind of how VC works. And so we were running out of sort of the bootstrap money and unable to really push it forward. But all these points about marketing and getting it into people's hands, and philosophically, I'm 100% behind what both everybody is saying. Tomas, Luis, is now, it's 100% accurate.
And well, based on what I hear here and the comments that I'm getting from Tomas, who meets you guys for the first time right now, he's meeting you. I think everything makes sense, and there's probably a lot more people like you out there, which is why this was successful for a number of reasons. Like there were these people that eventually found it and joined. Argonauta, what was your take on what the community was like and what the reception was?
It was very similar to what I see today on Reddit, where you know, because of the protests about third-party applications on Reddit, this big revolution, and the main question that they were asking is, well, where do we go? If it's not Reddit, where do we go? And back then, I think that a ton of people were having the same question. If it's not Reddit or if it's not Facebook, where do we go? So it's kind of the past is a reflection of today as well. Like a lot of the things that we needed back then are still needed now, which is kind of interesting. Like the world has changed so much, and yet is still the same.
Cool.
And the thing about them people was that we were learning while building this, and users were even probably less informed about why communities were so important, because social networks weren't as big of a part of life as they are now, and this information wasn't as big a problem as it is now. So we were seeing a really the little glimpses of what is life now with social networks. And to me, that's the difference between then and now, is that before I think we wanted to build this, and today we need this kind of, because we have to have different options. We have to have people organized so that they can start creating change, which isn't possible because, you know, people in power won't let you. So we have to build tools. I don't think that, you know, we are necessarily building the tool, but at least we are trying to build something that people can start using.
I like the alignment that you have with the zeitgeist today, but also the self-doubt, which is what Tomas was also mentioning before. And that's great, which brings me to my next question. And this goes this goes for both of you, but first to Aris. So tell us one of the highlights during the time with people, maybe the highlight, the one thing that was spectacular about it, something that happened that we should remember from that time.
Oh, wow. I mean, yeah, so as Luis was saying, the real takeaway was the lessons and the journey. But the most exciting thing about it, you know, I obviously failing is not fun. And there's no way around the fact that as a company and project, at least for that stage of it, we're looking to be resurrected. But that part of it was a failure. But it is exciting even today thinking about how on point we were on a lot of the core themes. It's exciting and what happened afterwards in terms of a lot of vindication in my opinion about the ideas. I mean, we were micro lending Bitcoin in 2013 for a yield on a communal Bitcoin treasury. If that's not cutting edge and early and interesting, I don't know what is. The other interesting and fun thing that seems like it happened for all of us to some degree or another is we all got involved very profitably in Bitcoin very early. So that was quite exciting. I remember being on vacation with some friends in China, and Bitcoin was just going on this tear from like $100 to 1,000. And looking at my account, which there was no good exchange on an app like there is today. These are janky websites. Mine was Camp BX, which people probably never even heard of, based out of Atlanta. And looking at these values, and it was like some sort of bug. It didn't look real. That was very exciting as well. But generally, in terms of at the time, what are the takeaways that aren't as sexy but are truly what was valuable from it? It was just all the mistakes and learning from it.
I love that. Great. Argonauta, your turn. Some highlight from the time with people.
Yeah, you know what? I wasn't a big empeopled user or any other website because I was always too busy coding to use the website. But I will always used to go and see what people were posting and how people were commenting and what people were asking for and all that. And to me, the biggest highlight was that it is so cool to create something that people actually use. It feels rewarding, that to me is the coolest thing. You spend 3 weeks just looking at the screen, coding and coding and coding, and then you publish it and people saying, oh, this feature is kind of cool. And even if they don't say it, just seeing that people were actually posting and commenting and upvoting, that was like, oh man, I'm helping building this. And somebody somewhere in the US or Mexico or Europe or France, I don't know, all of those people are using the site. So it was nice. That to me was a highlight.
It's a great feeling when you build something and people use it. Let me take a comment on the things that Tomas is hearing and see if he has anything to say about the things that are being said. Tomas, Mike's yours.
Aris, I think your point on VC on getting funding, um, uh, absolutely. It's shiny thing, and people will back what they want to back, and this is a difficult endeavor. And I'm really liking the fact that we're all coming into this with a high level of battle scarring and excitement, but not unbridled naivety. And so that makes me hopeful. The comment that I do have as an outsider coming into this is that I don't know what this looks like, right? And I think that that's part two and part three. But from this more philosophical conversation, I really like what this is. And in my mind, we need something for this for humanity, whether it's your homeowners association, whether it's your even like your family unit, whatever it might be. I'd love to continue understanding what this looks like, and I'm excited for part two and three.
Cool. As we're reaching about 55 minutes of discussing this, let me ask a couple more things. So the second question I have that's just straight and direct is, what was a very, very difficult moment for people or during the time of people?
The only difficult thing for me was because I really enjoyed even working on the problems, was having to wind it down. That's it. That's the only thing that was difficult in a meaningful way. Everything
Argonauta,
was difficult technically, but that's fun. So I don't consider
Argonauta,
that.
your turn.
I think it's the same problem that every developer has, that the more you develop, the more you want to rewrite the code. And asking Ari, please let me rewrite this because it works, but it can be better. That was always difficult.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And I think Tomas has a big stick for those who want to rewrite code that's working too. So let me ask the last question that I have of these series before we go into like some kind of open discussion that's going to be short. The last question is, what was the most disappointing thing, the thing you hated or the thing you really hated yourself for during the in people time? Ari, go first.
It's boring and obviously silly, but I just I hate that I didn't know more about my idiotic decisions. Yeah, I wish, again, it's hindsight's 2020, but also there was just a lot of immaturity to my understanding of how things worked. That naivete is sort of what cringes me now.
Argonauta, what is yours?
The chat. I just didn't like the idea of implementing a chat on a website that was going to be used by starting with 20 people. Why have a chat with 20 people? We could build a chat when you had 2,000 or 10,000 people, but trying to build a chat for 10 people, it was. I kept saying, I don't like this. We should just put it in the back burner. And eventually we didn't. I don't remember, but I don't think that we never published the chat. But yeah, I hated that.
I have one. Mine was that I was too incredibly busy to go after all those things. And remember, that's 2012, 13. Bitcoin to me, for example, was a big deal that I just next week I'll get to it, next week I'll get to it, until I eventually got to it, right? And I started the node and got the Bitcoin and all that. So to me, it was the same for people. It was more like I saw it, I knew what artists could do because, in full disclosure here, Aris a long time prior through one dear to him came to me and said he needs help to do that, and I said, yeah, sure, direct him to me. And he came up with this website, and when he described me what he wanted to do, I said, yes, I know the guy you should talk to. He makes websites. And it turns out that that website, and I'm not making this up, this is true, it existed. He made this website, whoup.com, which was literally exactly the same idea as Facebook. And it turns out it just didn't get the traction that Facebook did. Now, the person who got me into Facebook was Tomas back in 2004 when we met, like shortly after we met. And it was actually like back in the day when the UUIDs, like the user ID numbers for Facebook were like 5 digits or something, like 6 digits. So we were one of the first few there. And it was the kind of thing that, you go through that frenzy of Bitcoin is going on and other things are going on and people's going on. And that's way past like the Facebook era. So to me, the disappointment was that I didn't have the time to commit more time to the people at the time. So any comments, you guys?
Well, I would like to say thank you all for coming. Obviously, Tomas, this has been a very pleasant surprise to have you. I think we're going to try to trick you into being more involved somehow to the extent that you have any bandwidth, and I'm sure you don't. But yeah, and Isno, thank you for bringing him. But I'm excited. I want to leave it at that. I have lots of rambling I could do, but again, if the goal is for in the future somebody to accidentally discover this on YouTube, I don't want to torture them too much with like a 2-hour voice recording.
Exactly. So let's move to Tomas. How about Tomas?
Agree. Same sentiment, Aris and Luis and Yanni. Thank you for coming together. This has been very pleasant, and I'm excited. And Aris, the best way to who should you ask to do something? Ask the busiest person you know.
That's right.
Maybe. I'm not saying no. I'm not saying yes, but I'm excited to continue this journey.
Yeah,
Play it by ear. Yeah, and congratulations everyone for doing this. Even resurrecting a project, confronting your ego, your failures, keeping this thing alive, trying even this conversation. Big congratulations and applause to the three of you and everybody else that couldn't make it in the community. So thank you for doing this.
Great chat there. Argonauta, you have the last comment here.
Yeah, I don't know. At least now we have a recording so that we can hear it back in 10 years and see all the dumb things that we were doing 10 years ago. The same thing we think about people 10 years ago. So hello, me from the future.
I love it. So
I like that a lot.
Yeah, I think we're right here at the hour mark. So what I'll do is I'll pause this recording and we'll see everybody else, I guess, online, non-interactively, and then on part 2 and 3 that are going to be coming up. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you guys. Really appreciate it.